Thank you. City of Auburn, Nancy Backus.
I'm here.
City of Kent, Dana Ralph.
Good afternoon. I'm here.
City of Burien, Colleen Branch Schluter.
Good afternoon. Excuse my delay, my lateness. I apologize. And I'm here.
Thank you. And City of Covington, Christina Soltis. She let me know that she is not attending today. City of Des Moines, Tracy Buxton.
I'm here. Thanks.
City of Federal Way, Brian Davis. And we have Sarah Bridgeford sitting in for him today as the alternate. And thank you. City of Maple Valley, Sean Kelly. I don't believe he's here, absent. City of Normandy Park, Eric Zimmerman. We heard that Eric will not be attending today. And
sent his regrets. So.
Okay. Thank you, Nicholas. City of Renton, Ryan McIrvin. I don't know if he's here yet, but we have.
I'll be representing on his behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. That's Hannah Bondmiller. And City of Tukwila, Cynthia Delastrinas Johnson. She let me know she wouldn't be here. And I know that Deshaun Quinn was going to try and join, but I don't see him here. And then King County, Sonori Marshall, and she let me know she is on vacation as well. Thanks, Mayor. Oh, you're on mute.
I said I wasn't going to do that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I do believe we have one of our advisory board members. I thought I saw her, Dr. Linda Smith. I thought I saw her at least briefly on the screen.
Yeah, she may have dropped off or had a bad connection. I saw her as well, though.
Okay. All right. Well, when she comes back, we will welcome her. In the meantime, we will move on to public comment. This is the time on the agenda for public comment. If you would like to make a comment, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. You'll have 3 minutes to make remarks. Please state your name and city of residence for our record. And just wondering if there is anyone out there that you can see, Claire or Dorsal, that is interested in providing. Oh, yes, it looks like we do have one person's hand up. Anna.
And I'm promoting you to a panelist now so that you can have 3 minutes.
And Anna, it looks like you have been promoted to panelist. If you would like to unmute and provide your comments. Anna, if you're having...
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
So sorry. Yeah, so thank you for allowing me to comment. I just wanted to share my thoughts as a community member of Federal Way. I did speak to a couple people last week about some comments that I had shared via email, and I just wanted to share them here during the meeting as well. I have been following the housing plans regionally, and just wanted to share that I had done a little of my own research to look at how much each city is getting of the tax exemption housing. And I did find that, as I was suspecting, Federal Way was getting an excessive amount of tax exempt housing. And so I just wanted to share my concerns about plans that you might have, the regional, I'm not sure what you guys call it, South King housing something, I don't know the rest. But as you're looking at the applications and deciding where to, what to select for housing, please keep in mind that Federal Way is already very burdened. I can share the stats that I have that I've compiled from the King County tax exemption data. And as it was last year when I did it, it was 4,000 housing units for Federal Way that we have as tax exempt, many of them in single projects. So this does burden our school district and our city policing, all of that, drawing on all of the services without any funding. And so when I looked at your plan to surround some of the housing around transit-oriented development, and knowing that Federal Way is not going to be getting any of that until 2026 at this point, I think it would be very important to be intentional about where housing is placed, especially considering we are also looking for more jobs in our region, and we don't have them at the moment. So the upward mobility part, in order to get that, we need to have the jobs, which we have to draw the workers that want the jobs, and some balance to housing, middle income, upper income. Also, if we want to add more of the upper income brackets to our city, which are the missing brackets according to Department of Commerce, we may want to consider, I'm just suggesting that maybe you consider adding some staffing that can monitor for compliance for the MFTE housing. So I would think that might encourage more of this as well, because our city won't be able to keep up with that monitoring. So as a region, maybe something to consider, pooling funds and resources to do that for all the cities. So that's all I wanted to share. If anybody is interested, I can share the data that I've compiled. I do think it's really important that we're intentional about this so that we can set every city up for success. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks for joining us today. Anyone else out there? Let's see, I don't know that I see anyone else with a hand raised.
That appears to be the last one, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much, Dorsal. All right, we will close public comment and we will move on to item number 3, which is the approval of the June 16th, 2023 minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved. Tracy?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Tracy and a second by Dana. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor of the approval of the June 16th, 2023 minutes, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no. The minutes have been passed. All right, moving on to item 4. The first item on the agenda today is an overview of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. I think everyone is familiar. And as we remember, KCRHA joined us last August and presented on the organization at that time. Today is an opportunity to hear an update from them and learn what makes them similar and different from SKIP, since we have had some of those conversations recently. And so, Claire, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the KCRHA staff that has joined us today.
Thanks, Mayor. And before I introduce them, I do want to just preface this by saying that, you know, the executive board has had a lot of conversations around SKIP's role in addressing homelessness, and KCRHA has been mentioned a number of times at the board level. So we thought it very timely and applicable to invite them into the conversation, to just promote more awareness about their organization, to give clarity about what they do versus what we do, where those similarities are, and kind of what our differences are as well. And so with that, I would love to introduce to you Alexis Mercedes Rank, Director of Subregional Planning and Equitable Engagement, and Abby Anderson, Subregional Planning Specialist for South King County, both at KCRHA. And thank you both for being here. And take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having us. It is always very exciting to get before this group and be connected with the work that you all are doing. My name is Alexis. Abby?
Hi all, my name's Abby. I think I've met most of you, but I'm the South King County Subregional Planner. Pass back to Alexis.
So for today's presentation, we're going to do a quick overview and refresher a bit about the nature of KCRHA, talk also about the realm that KCRHA operates and how it's complementary to the work you all are doing here at SKIP, and then talk about the approved 5-year plan and some of the South King County sub-regional planning efforts that Abby has been leading in. And so with that, taking us to our first slide related to background. Just by way of a refresher, the King County Regional Homelessness Authority was established in December 2019 through an interlocal agreement between Seattle and King County. And throughout 2020, what was intended to be time for setting up the agency, I think we all know as we entered into the pandemic, a lot of priorities and work shifted. And so the stand-up of the authority was a bit delayed, but that brought us into 2021, where our first CEO was brought on board in April with a real focus on the startup executive team and began the sub-regional planning efforts and some new data reports coming out. Throughout 2022, we've focused on transferring and condensing contracts, standing up the Partnership for Zero program, stepping into the severe weather space, which is one that somehow is becoming more a critical body of work, and then also looking at new ways that we can center lived experience and start doing research and evaluation of how we can redesign our services. And we're continuing that effort towards service redesign, especially under the scope of and by guidance of our approved 5-year plan. And so that takes us into a little bit about our role, and namely what responsibilities we inherited from the predecessor organizations of City of Seattle and King County. And I know we have some King County colleagues on the line as well. To be very clear, KCRHA is not in the realm of housing capital and development. Those are still responsibilities and roles held by City of Seattle and King County. However, we oversee continuum of care funded programs. Continuum of care dollars are from HUD. And we also oversee programs related to shelter, diversion, rapid rehousing. We're the holders of the coordinated entry system, which facilitates permanent housing placements for folks that are experiencing homelessness into permanent housing options and permanent supportive housing options. We also oversee the Homelessness Management Information System, also known as HMIS, and this is all of the system's client level data. And we oversee contracts related to outreach. We're not as much in the realm as encampment cleans or behavioral health response, but we absolutely partner with agencies that lead in that work. And so put simply, we are a special jurisdiction government agency. We receive and administer public funding, and we're an administrator of programs and policies, and we partner with public and private organizations. And we are different to then King County Department of Human Services, Community and Human Services. While our acronym is a little bit too close to King County Housing Authority, we are separate from King County Housing Authority, and we do not have the ability to levy taxes. With that, our formal role and scope and what we're overall charged with is this unified planning and coordination for funding and services for people experiencing homelessness. We have oversight on policy and contract management, and we are the continuum of care lead agency as required by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. So we receive federal funding, and this is something that was formerly housed in an entity known as All Home, if that perks up anybody's ears. We've absorbed the functions of All Home. One of the innovative and exciting things about the establishment of the authority was the creation of a new ombuds office to create a pathway for folks to seek accountability and be able to input grievances while they may be accessing services. And this creates a new lens of accountability for our system writ large. And we were also charged with the establishment of clear metrics and milestones for how we measure success and create more accountability in our system. With that, a little bit about our funding, because we oversee a lot of different elements of funding. We oversee public funding, both from city and county fund sources. So now overseeing and administering funding from King County, as well as City of Seattle, Bothel's in there twice, Bothell, Kenmore, looking at Shoreline and Woodinville. And this funding goes out to contracts with local service providers. And then looking at some of the funding made available through Governor Inslee's right-of-way initiative that has allowed us to be able to do encampment resolutions, which we'll talk about shortly. And then we also, as stated before, we oversee and administer federal funds from Continuum of Care, primarily done through the NOFO. And then we also have a partnership with an organization known as We Are In. This is a variety of philanthropic organizations that have come together to try and make higher impact investments, and the first of which most notably being Partnership for Zero. So a lot of different fund sources go through the agency for a lot of different initiatives. And with that, to give a sense of that, a lot of our money while coming in through those means goes straight out the door to service providers. So we are that mechanism that's really the primary public funder. That big teal chunk of this pie chart is all of that money that's going out to service providers. The slender yellow slice within that pie is direct services for Partnership for Zero. So that represents the philanthropic investment. And then our administrative budget represents about 5.4% to support agency operations. And you can see to those number breakdowns to the right, but our agency to date is about 100 full-time employees working to make the system whole and doing a variety of different efforts, from contract monitoring to data and evaluation to planning, with also a number of employees also engaged in direct service work as well. And with that, a bit about progress to date before we start talking about 5-year plan and sub-regional planning. Looking at our success as a system in 2022, more than 5,600 individuals, couples, and families moved into permanent housing in 2022. We've done some really tremendous and exciting work just engaging community, especially around the 5-year plan, but continuing to engage people with lived experience, with our count of being well over 1,000 people engaged in some way, shape, or form to inform our planning processes. The emergency housing vouchers program was tremendously successful. This was a resource made available through the American Rescue Plan, and this allowed for over 1,400, an allocation of over 1,400 vouchers that offered 10 years of housing affordability to King County residents, and in partnership with the Renton Housing Authority, King County Housing Authority, and Seattle Housing Authority, we were able to work with our service provider network to be able to allocate those vouchers to people experiencing homelessness and be able to work to successfully lease up using that voucher. And so, as many may know, sometimes the most challenging element of getting a voucher is being able to successfully lease up, and our region was able to successfully lease up everybody under this program, which means 1,400 folks now have 10 years of housing affordability, which I think is just something we should take a moment to celebrate as a community. We're working on also developing our equitable procurement processes. We have our equitable procurement manual, and we're preparing to launch into re-procurement efforts. Also working to ensure that encampment resolutions are focused on housing. And so just to be sure that we're all working from a similar understanding, encampment resolutions are an effort wherein we will take a targeted approach to working in a specific encampment, develop a by name list, and develop housing plans to ultimately clear the space and have folks going into some type of temporary housing option that meets their needs. Further looking at how we're continuing to improve our coordination and effectiveness on severe weather response. Again, a bigger body of work than I think we all intended to be, but we've had some pretty toasty summers and cold winters. And so trying to figure out ways that we can keep folks safe and improve our coordination across King County. And lastly, want to acknowledge the work that has been going on across the board, that we now have an approved 5-year plan, unanimously approved by our implementation board and governing committee. Huge thank you to the leaders here that were a part of that and getting us to that place, because a unanimously approved plan, I think, is a great signal to where we're heading as a region. And with that, taking us to the next slide, I want to pass it to Abby to talk a bit about the work that she's been doing around sub-regional planning. First of all, starting with an explain around what is sub-regional planning.
Thanks, Alexis. Yeah, a lot of you hopefully know what sub-regional planning is, because I know that I've talked with a lot of you, and Alexis and I are sub-regional planner. So our team looks at the unique needs of the 39 cities in King County, and we've broken up those 39 cities into 7 sub-regions. So the 2 in the South area are South King County and Southeast King County. We work on extensive and ongoing engagement with both city staff, elected officials, service provider organizations, and community-based organizations. We've looked at sub-regional analytics. So we have our regional dashboard with all of our different homelessness services available in each sub-region. We're also looking at different funding and regional investments. And then we look at service and funding agreements specific to each sub-region. So the kind of main reason we wanted to come here today, and that we've been working really in partnership a lot with Claire and Dorsal, so thank you both so much, is to talk about how our organizations are similar and different and how we can work together and partner moving forward. So we've created this little graphic talking about, as you all know, SKHHP working on housing capital funding, focusing on affordable housing, and then focusing on, and is a formal collaboration of South King County cities. We as KCRHA are focused on the coordination of homelessness services, focusing more on the homelessness response system, and then have an informal partnership right now with South King County cities. So together, we comprise what I consider to be kind of the full spectrum of homelessness services, from affordable housing and the preventative element of homelessness to the homelessness response system and really that crisis kind of emergency line. So across that whole spectrum, our 2 organizations are working collaboratively on those topics. And I just want to pause to see if Claire and Dorsal have anything they want to add, since I know we kind of collaboratively worked on this slide and just want to make sure I'm capturing everything well.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think this slide is particularly important for the board because those questions have come up, even at the member jurisdiction councils about, how does SKHHP work with KCRHA? What's the relationship? Are you funded by KCRHA? What, and so I think that was the intention of this slide. And I think, this really just does show that, for those housing and homelessness topics where there is overlap, that's where we start to engage with each other. So just wanted to mention that as well. But thanks, Abby.
Perfect. Thanks, Claire. With that, we can move into talking about our 5-year plan. We have 2 slides going over this, and then we'll dive into our sub-regional implementation plan. So first, our 5-year plan process really started a year ago, last summer of 2022, looking at community engagement all across King County. We had workshops with sub-regions, system partners, so met with education systems, emergency response, healthcare systems, things like that, and then had a subpopulation focus as well for some of those workshops. Moving into the fall and the winter, we began content development with community review of that content, going back out to those groups. South King County staff, many of whom are on this call, weighed in throughout this process, providing feedback and review of the content as we went along. In January, we released our first draft of the plan to the public and received over 640 responses, I believe, to our survey, and had an extensive review both with community, both with those work groups that we formed before, and with our governing committee and implementation board. In February and March, we took all that feedback and restructured the plan, re-released it, and it was unanimously approved by our implementation board and governing committee this past June. Our plan structure has one primary goal, which says to bring unsheltered people inside in a way that meets their needs as swiftly as possible. After that, there are a few key elements of the plan, one of which is that it unifies and coordinates our funding and policy for the homelessness response system, that it improves system-wide efficiency, effectiveness, and accountability, going back to the Ombuds office and different sort of mechanisms we're putting in place that Alexis was talking about. And then finally, that we are investing in policies and programs with proven outcomes, really evidence-based decisions and action steps in that plan. So I'll pass it back to Alexis to round out the 5-year plan.
Thanks, Abby. And so as we really ground the 5-year plan, we take a focused look at how we can examine addressing homelessness with 3 primary lenses. The first lens is looking at what's happening with our service provider organizations, a number of which that I imagine you all know, some serving South King County from Multi-Service Center to Catholic Community Services, Fusion Federal Way, and so on. And really looking at what can we do to build on what service providers are already doing well, supporting best practices, funding the programs that people want to access, and working towards having fair wages for frontline staff. The second lens that we look at in the 5-year plan and make suggested actions to improve upon is on the next slide. Thanks. On improving our network of homeless services. So looking out at what is the relationship between our service providers and how can we take steps to measure progress for accountability for the broader network of service providers, while also collecting better data and using that to match people to services, coordinating as a team to overall be more efficient when we're working with an individual who is on the pathway to housing, while also looking at how we can build in increased use of federal social programs with all of our homeless service providers in the broader network. And then our last lens that we look at is looking at then the homeless response systems connection to other systems of care, like behavioral health, like the foster care system, school system, and so on. And the plan includes a number of activities that work towards trying to ensure that there's no wrong door in accessing services and that people are getting the help that they need because systems like the homeless response system, healthcare, education, foster care, employment are working together to also prevent homelessness. And with that, we identify in the plan that we will know that we are successful when we have more shelter beds and housing options to direct people to. People have the services they need and can move through the system quickly. Fewer people are returning to living outside after shelter, and more people are permanently housed. And we have a number of system performance metrics that we're tracking along the way in order to speak to exactly these points. And so with that, with the 5-year plan serving as our strategic roadmap to transform the homelessness response system, then we have the effort of sub-regional planning and the development of these sub-regional implementation plans that really seek to answer the key question, what does it mean to implement these activities in South King County, for example? I'm going to pass it back to Abby.
Perfect. Thanks, Alexis. So this is the work we're engaging in right now. It's very exciting. Literally this morning, we were drafting more content for this. So it's really exciting for us, but also we're excited to get some more feedback and hear from all of you. So the sub-regional plans right now have 7 main sections, several background sections on about KCRHA, acknowledgements, and overview of the 5-year plan, since these plans are really rooted in that main document, and then talking more about our engagement and development process for both plans, and then looking at sub-regional analytics. So we've taken a look at the different data and shelter and services available in each sub-region, and we're identifying particular bright spots, gaps, needs, and things like that across not only geographically, but also for different subpopulations and housing and shelter types. Also looking at the level of resources and investments in each subregion. And then finally, the meat of the plan will be the 7th section, which looks at key actions, timeline, and metrics. So really building out concrete action steps so that we can collaboratively work on this plan, have timeline and metrics to know when we're on track. So our approach here is that we, from that 5-year plan, we've developed about 30, actually I think it's a few more than that now, activities that will be tailored to each subregion. And this simply means that they are something that service providers, city staff, community partners have identified as something that needs to be tailored and specific to each subregion, to South King County, in order for it to be most successful. So the ones that didn't make it into the sub-regional implementation plans are simply activities that require standardization across the region, and KCRHA will handle that, or they are KCRHA administrative tasks that we will take care of in-house. Of course, always making sure that we have accountability mechanisms set up. So these action steps and timelines are going to be developed and reviewed and have feedback, again, similar to the 5-year plan, in partnership with the South King community. So that is the end of our presentation. Happy to take any questions, feedback, or anything like that. And I'll stop sharing really quick.
Excellent. Thank you, Alexis and Abby. Every time I hear the presentation, I hear something new in it. Not that you're saying things differently, just that I'm picking up on something else every time. Questions, Tracy?
Thank you. Well, this is an exciting time, right? Lots of stretching and growing pains, I understand. So I am still trying to get a big picture of exactly how the KCRHA is stepping into function in the region. So if you can help me out here. So when you talked about All Home, and when that was disbanded and incorporated under the umbrella of KCRHA, was this established just to take over and refine the functions of All Home, or was that just one thing that you did in order? I'm trying to, is this a funnel for funding into services and organizing it so that it's more organized, or are you working to create new services and agencies besides whatever All Home did?
Tracy, if I can just share for a moment, because I was on All Home.
Yeah.
We were more the continuum of care. We didn't know for a long time, but that is what All Home was. Their main function was the continuum of care. So the NOFA, when it would come out every year, was our responsibility to help identify where those funds should go. There is still a continuum of care portion committee, but that is not what that's not what KCRHA is. So I'll just turn it over to Alexis and Abby to accurately answer that. But
absolutely. And so thank you, Mayor Backus, and thank you for your service to that board too. We have taken over those responsibilities on top of a couple of other previous departments' responsibilities. So City of Seattle's Human Services Department had a number of contracts that they held with local homeless service providers. So holding those contracts, but then King County also holding a number of contracts to local service providers. And those were focused on local funds. So All Home held the federal funds, applying for the NOFO and those sort of processes. But then there were also other departments that administered local funding for homeless services. So KCRHA was an effort and is an effort to consolidate all of those processes under one roof so we can have a real insight into what's happening across the homeless response system now that all trying to get all of the contracts in one place and having all of the data and reporting also one place, so we can speak more with greater confidence to what's happening in the system in terms of availability of beds, the strategy and funding, and so on.
So you're saying that so all of the funding that went into administering all of these plans in different places has now been consolidated into one agency. Is there a different amount of resource that's being used in order to do that now? Is it?
Apologies. I want to understand. Can you rephrase your question?
Sorry. So I got a number in another meeting I was in this week that the amount that is being allocated to KCRHA is about $225 million. Is that true?
We have
annual.
That seems a little high.
So I corrected. I said, well, when this was first established, I remember in March 2020, I think it was supposed to be 125 million. So I don't know what it is now. But the main question is, with that amount of money, is that what was being spent before in order to administrate all of these systems from other places? Has all this resource been also now the responsibility has been gathered together? Is it the same amount of resource when you collect it from these other people, or has there been an increase, a huge increase in the amount of resource in order to still administrate all of these programs together?
So I'm providing in the chat also our approved budget for this year, which does a breakdown of all the different program types. But I think your question is speaking to, since the formation of KCRHA, have we put in more money into homelessness response? Is that kind of the crux of your question, but also like the administrative costs to managing?
Yeah, I mean, just to try and get a big picture and kind of tied in with that, for example, on the one page here, something I don't really understand is that KCRHA does not have a capital funding. It says housing capital development is not part of what you do. But then shelter is. It says here that the City of San Joaquin County don't do shelter, KCRHA does. Does that mean that you are going to have capital investments, or you're going to manage somebody else's capital investment?
That's a great question. So our funding is going towards the operations of that shelter. So
Okay.
being able to pay the frontline staffing, the wages, and the other services at an existing shelter. So rather than the stand up of that site and the construction of a new place, looking at how we fund the operations and staffing for a shelter program.
Okay. Okay. So whoever else invests in it. And then I think maybe, and then is what you're saying is part of what you're doing when you're increasing these services is encouraging, maybe is part of your job to encourage other people or other developers or investors to invest in these capital projects. You make the connections, or you say, we'll support the operations if you'll invest in the capital. Is that what you're saying?
We definitely are a partner in the space of wanting to stand up more things. And I think to that point, being partnered with Skip in this and seeing the through line of like development of affordable housing, as well as looking at the work DCHS is doing in standing up, for example, help through housing and other spaces. We're absolutely a partner in that kind of space to advocate and say, because we understand that we need more housing as a region in order to also address homelessness. So we view ourselves as a partner in that kind of sense, but not having responsibility, like full authority in that realm, is something we also recognize.
Okay. Thanks. I appreciate your patience while I formulate my question. So appreciate it. Thank you.
They're great questions. Thank you. It is a little funky.
Other questions? Yeah, Tracy, I think that was really good. I think part of the reason that KCRHA was established to begin with is King County and the city of Seattle realized that they were spending a lot of money, and sometimes they had contracts with the same organization. Those contracts were in conflict with one another. And so you are pulling some of these nonprofit agencies in different directions when they should be all aligned and doing the same thing, so that we are not duplicating efforts and we are not conflicting those agencies and having them do the work of housing individuals. And even some of the metrics and things were different. And so they were spending a lot of time trying to just make sure that they were reporting what both King County and Seattle wanted. And it just didn't make any sense when it could be streamlined and one agency doing that work and leading the charge. Not that either one of those government entities are completely out of the business of working on homelessness. That's not the case. But this was just a way to streamline operations, have it all focused in one area, the economy of scale as well. So a lot of great reasons that we all fought to have KCRHA established. Cool. Maybe that helps a little bit too. Any other questions? Well, Alexis and Abby, thank you so much on a beautiful Friday afternoon for coming, joining us, and allowing us to understand a little bit more. Like I say, every time I hear the presentation, I capture something else. And today it really resounded with me with the no wrong doors. I truly appreciate that, because one of the things that we did at one table was identify some of the root causes of homelessness, and to know that now the goal and the plan is to make sure that there are no wrong doors, that anyone can enter and still get the assistance that they need. So thank you very much for that. And you're welcome to join us anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, on to board business. Item number 5, we have 5A is revised Housing Capital Fund guidelines. And last month, if you remember, we adopted the 2023 Housing Capital Fund guidelines, but we did direct Claire and Dorsal to incorporate House Bill 1590 funds into the guidelines if legislative intent was established by a contributing member jurisdiction before today. So Claire is going to present a revised draft incorporating those House Bill 1590 funding guidelines. Claire?
Thank you, Mayor, and thanks, Dorsal, for sharing. If you could go to presenter mode and swap that screen. Swap it. Thank you. And go to the next slide, please. All right, it's looking good. So I wanted to let the board know that you should have 2 documents relevant to this topic in your agenda packet, and it's also included in your calendar invite. It's the track changes version of the updates that incorporates the House Bill 1590 funds into the guidelines that you adopted last month. And there's also a version that shows it as a clean version and incorporates all of those track changes. So if you are interested in following along, it can be found there. So go to the next slide, please. All right, super. So by way of background and to orient you back to this topic, at our last board meeting, we workshopped language together to ensure that a project that wasn't supported by the project location jurisdiction would not be funded with SKHHP funds. And you adopted the Housing Capital Fund guidelines that included the single source of revenue, or the substitute House Bill 1406 funds, which most of our jurisdictions contribute to. And you then provided direction, as Mayor Backus said, that SKHHP staff should work to incorporate House Bill 1590 funds this funding round, if possible, through working with the funding jurisdictions who collect this revenue and are interested in pooling. So the adopted version was edited to include the availability of House Bill 1590 funds, and that revised version was sent to you for review on June 28th. Today, we're going to review the changes, and I'll ask for your consideration in adopting these guidelines today so we can publish them on Monday, and to provide a brief update on legislative actions at those cities collecting the House Bill 1590 revenue and are interested in pooling with SKHHP. So we did present to Covington's Human Services Commission a couple weeks back, and they subsequently made the recommendation to their city council to support the Housing Capital Fund. And council concurred with that recommendation. So they'll be contributing almost $500,000 for this year's funding round. And then Maple Valley has started the conversation at their council, but they've invited myself and our board chair, Mayor Backus, to their September 11th council meeting to discuss what pooling funds with the Housing Capital Fund looks like, since they are our newer member and have not contributed yet. So looking forward to that conversation in September. And there's still a chance that Maple Valley could pool funding this year, but if not, and they're interested, they certainly can pool next year. And then Kent, as we mentioned at last meeting, already took legislative action last year, directing a portion of their collected revenue to SKHHP's Housing Capital Fund. And next slide, please. So let's review some of the changes since you took action last month. So I'll start by saying that this updated version is administrative. The changes that were made are administrative in nature and doesn't change any of the content that the board has been most focused on. The funding priorities adopted in June also remain unchanged. And so to summarize the changes, I added House Bill 1590 funds from participating member jurisdictions. And if you've looked at the draft, you may have seen already, but I did want to highlight and call it out that we are pooling over $6 million this year. And just really want to shout out everyone who's worked on this to make that happen. Mayor Ralph and Councilmember Soltis, And just a huge kudos for their leadership, and also Mayor Kelly and his leadership. So just, I think everyone should feel really proud of yourselves for this. This is an exciting time, very inspiring, and yeah, it just means we'll be able to get more funding out the door and support more projects in South County. So just really excited about that. We also added eligible and ineligible activities for use of the SKHHP 1590 funds. We updated the method to apply for the folks that are submitting applications from requiring a flash drive to submitting the application via a shared folder over email. We added a requirement for projects already funded by SKHHP to provide us the applications submitted to other public funders. And then I incorporated some minor changes from our legal department. And next slide, please. So in terms of next steps, so today I'm hoping that we can adopt the revised guidelines. And then on Monday, we'll be publishing those guidelines and begin that advertising and outreach to developers and getting the word out that funding is now available and we have adopted our guidelines. And then beginning next week through about mid-August through August 18th, we'll be holding pre-application meetings, which are a requirement for applicants. And so we'll be holding those with the city staff that the projects are located in. And then October 20th, we'll begin reviewing those applications at our monthly meeting with you. And then November 17th, we'll be hoping to get your recommendations on which projects to fund. And I think that's it for this item. Yeah, so we can stop sharing the screen, Dorsal, and I would open it up. For questions.
Questions from anyone? Comments? Concerns? I do agree with Claire's comments about thanking those of you for your leadership on the changes that are being made. Dana.
Thank you. I just, we're very excited to see us here. When our council made the decision to take those 1590 funds, it was one of those, it was a tough decision, but the goal really was to make sure that the tax dollars collected in Kent, in South King County, stay here. And I think that this is exactly what our council intended. And being able to support housing here in the South County is the goal for that money. So we're excited to be able to pool these dollars and really make an impact.
Excellent. Thank you. Tracy.
Well, nobody was raising their hand, and when you asked for comments, I'm always full of thanks. So I'm full of thanks for from the very beginning, putting this coalition together and all the cities that have joined to pool whatever funds they did have. And if I could, turn back time, I would work way harder to see if we could get those $1590. But touche to the cities who did. And I'm extremely thankful that we have the ability to, like Dana said, to take this funding and make sure that it stays here in South County, and just appreciate being here and what we're able to do. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. And Claire, I believe you are looking for a motion. If there aren't any other questions, a motion to adopt the revised 2023 Housing Capital Fund guidelines, correct?
Correct.
All right. So if there are no more comments, no more questions, is anyone interested in making a motion to adopt those guidelines?
I'll move. Second.
Perfect. We have a motion and a second to adopt the revised 2023 Housing Capital Fund guidelines. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to adopt the revised 2023 Housing Capital Fund guidelines, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say no. Congratulations, we have new guidelines for 2023. Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you for the work, you and Dorsal, and I'm sure the staff working group and so many others for getting us to this point. Appreciate it very, very much. And now on to item B, the long-term funding strategy for housing capital funds. And we want developing a long-term funding strategy is currently included as a critical item, as we recall, on the 2023 work plan and a top priority on the 2024 work plan. We talked about this a little bit at the June 16th meeting, and this is just a continuation of that discussion. Claire.
Thanks, Mayor. And thanks, Dorsal, for sharing that. And let's go to presenter mode. Thank you. And you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So if you recall, let me pull up my notes. So as Mayor Backus mentioned, so we started this conversation last month, but got cut short on time. I wanted to bring it back to ensure that we're giving it the time and the space that this topic deserves. So to refresh your memory, this item was one of the highest priorities of the board in 2023 and is also included as a high priority item on our 2024 work plan. So the work plan item is listed on the slide, and I'm just going to read it out loud. Develop a long-term funding strategy for the Housing Capital Fund and facilitate conversations with member jurisdictions to identify and explore dedicated sources of revenue for affordable housing at the local and regional level. So at last month's meeting, I provided an inventory of possible revenue sources for your reference, and you got into small groups and discussed the questions. What does this work plan item mean to you? Are new revenue sources needed for the Housing Capital Fund? If so, are there dedicated sources of revenue your jurisdiction would or would not support? And we had wonderful note takers sitting in on the conversations, and they provided that information to me. And we'll go over a little bit of what they heard about those revenue options from you all. And those revenue options were included as part of your agenda materials. It's in an Excel document. They're also included in today's calendar invite. And next slide, please. So overall, most board members felt that levying additional taxes on residents would be a hard sell, and any new funds produced through taxation may be needed elsewhere in jurisdictions' budgets. And as Council President Delestrinos Johnson had pointed out last meeting, the two most appealing options for her group were philanthropic contributions and working with our state and federal delegations to bring awareness of city-specific projects. And this aligned with the other small group discussions as well. Under the maybe category, it sounds like there is openness to supporting a local REIT option, and for those with inclusionary zoning policies, an in lieu fee when developers don't provide the actual affordable units required, but instead they pay a fee for the city to provide that affordable housing. And next slide, please. So to remind the board of the items that we reviewed, I'd like to go over them just one by one. So first is the property tax levy. And this one was described by the board as being one of those more challenging ones. The local REIT option. So this came up at the state legislature last year, and I hear that it will likely come back for next year's legislative session. And this was an item the board was open to considering since it does allow that flexibility for cities to opt in. A general fund set aside, this is, cities setting aside a certain percent, even a fraction of a percent to support affordable housing. And then the inclusionary housing in lieu fee. which we just talked a little bit about. Proceeds from land sales, when surplus public property is sold, does the city have a policy in place on how to use those funds? And maybe there's some consideration there for reinvesting those into some of the housing needs in the community. And then tax increment financing. This is something I know Federal Way is currently working on, but this essentially takes the future incremental revenue on assessed values in a given perimeter to spend those dollars to reinvest and either build housing or other forms of economic development that exist there. So that's a local financing option tool. And I don't know how much the board has experience in that, but it's a really, I would say it's been around for a very long time, and it's something you see once in a while. I'm a big fan. I think it's a way of capturing those future revenues and having it not be so burdensome, I would say, to taxpayers. And then commercial linkage fees. These are those impact fees on new commercial development. And I think that was one of the ones the board expressed, this might be kind of challenging and we don't want to do anything that might deter some commercial interest. So that's potentially a more challenging one for a community. A payroll tax, that's very ambitious, but it is an option. So wanted to put it on the list. So essentially having a tax on your payroll for either at a certain threshold of a certain size of a company or certain gross revenue for those larger earning companies in your community. And then philanthropic collaborations. This could mean a lot of different things. And I have later on in this conversation, I want to hear what this really means to you all. But I was thinking of it in a couple ways. One is working directly with philanthropy to support, South King County affordable housing needs. It could also mean SKHHP directly collaborating with philanthropy and funding the Housing Capital Fund. SKHHP can serve as that intermediary for partnership and collaboration. There's lots of things that this could mean. And then there's the state and federal work. And on here, I had project-specific line items. So my thinking around this was for those projects that the jurisdictions have in their queue, if you know of something that your jurisdiction is needing funding for, if it's land acquisition for at a particular location that you're hoping to develop or set aside for maybe an affordable homeownership project or maybe a shelter site, something like this, or maybe you're funding some aspect of a project. That is the vision I had for this one, but we're going to hear from you in just a minute on what that item also means. And let me just see. I think so. You might be asking yourself, so why are we talking about all these concepts when most of these are not going to be financially supporting the Housing Capital Fund? So I've been giving this some thought. So to me, the work plan item is referencing two concepts related to the strategy for funding affordable housing. One is addressing the need to fund the actual Housing Capital Fund. And the other is addressing the need to fund affordable housing in South King County that is possibly directly linked to the Housing Capital Fund or maybe not. But I see this item as kind of encompassing and embracing both of those things. And so some of these tools are relevant to, I would say, some of those buckets, one of them, one over the other, but just wanted to point that out in case you were kind of thinking that through a little bit. And I see them being directly related and tied to each other. Because let's say a tax increment financing tool being implemented in, let's say, the city of Federal Way, that if they're funding an affordable housing project, they could also be potentially applying to the SKHHP Housing Capital Fund. And I think, you know, any of the cities could be doing that. It's a part of our guidelines that allows that. And so just wanted to kind of make that connection with the board a little bit to think about, we have the Housing Capital Fund, but how can we also then leverage it with all of these other tools and opportunities? And so with that, we can go to the next slide. And I just have some questions for you all then coming out of this. So I would just like to hear a little bit about your vision for the long-term funding strategy for the Housing Capital Fund, and then increasing funding for affordable housing in South King County. What else should I be considering as part of the funding strategy? Did I miss something? Was something left off the list that you're kind of interested in learning about? Did I capture the small group conversation that you all had? Anything to add? And then would love to hear about what the philanthropy contributions and engaging with the state and federal delegations might mean to you. So Chair, I would love to just kind of go through each question a little bit and see if folks have thoughts on these.
Absolutely. So it's going to be difficult. Let me see if I can see people as well as maybe.
I can put the questions in the chat.
That's what I was just going to ask. If you could type each question in the chat, that will help us focus, and we can see everyone's hands, and that would be very helpful. Okay, so the first one. Tell us about your vision for the long-term funding strategy for the Housing Capital Fund and increasing funding for affordable housing in SKC. That's a lot. Let's just be honest. That's a big question. Does anyone remember the conversations that we had? Because that was at least a month ago, and we've all had a lot of things going on since then. Dana.
I think in our group, we talked about, when this, again, I feel like a little bit of a broken record. I say this every time. I don't think we realized we would be here, right? That we would have these dedicated funding sources. So when this appeared on the work plan, it was really like, in 5 years and 10 years, are we going to have funding sources? And now we have $1,406 and $1,590 and those kinds of things that via action from the legislature, we are able to capture. So in our group, we talked, a little bit about sort of how this item came about. And then, this month we're finalizing the way to then push those dollars out the door. So I think for me, for our group, we felt like we were more on the end of this item than at the beginning. And going to the increasing piece, and I think the good news is, short of a significant recession, the way these funds are collected, we will progressively see additional dollars year over year. So I think that answers that increased funding. And then separately, the other piece we talked about was that sort of philanthropic contribution, and that's addressed more down there in question number 4.
Any other comments on question number 1? I know there were a lot of robust conversations going on in that room. Tracy?
Thank you. I was looking for the raise hand feature. I have notes here that basically the last two were our favorites. The philanthropic collaboration is a favorite because, you know, other people's money is always a favorite. And state and federal project specific line items. I do think, you know, that the legislature seems to make policy one year and then look for money the next year. And this year was, they called it, you know, the housing session, right? And I feel like there are probably several things that are going to be asked this next session to help with some of this policy that they put forward last spring. So I'm wondering if there's going to be, you know, a 0.1% something or other that will be an option for us coming down the line. And I guess another question with all of these things, since we did just get these new commitments in regard to Claire and Dorsal's work plan and the staff capacity, just wanted to make sure, like, if we give a direction here, is this something that they're going to put on a priority and possibly maybe wait until we see what other resource might be coming down the line? This was a huge increase in resource, this approval that we just made here. And so don't want to overtax staff here and maybe spending time to go look for other resources when we may just have some coming down the line. So that was, and then I guess my other kind of, I need more money, more.
We all need more money.
Yeah, I know. Need a little more information and understanding in regard to tax increment financing if I were to get on board with recommending something like that, but I've always been intrigued with it. And so that's my input. Thank you.
You know, Claire, that might be, and I think maybe you and Dana and I have chatted about it, but to have someone come in and fully explain TIF, because it is brand new to the state of Washington. We were one of the last holdouts because most countries or most states around the country have been using TIF or some form of it. And we had very limited opportunity with anything TIF previously, but it might serve this group well to have TIF 101. And it could even be something that we do as a special session outside of this and invite others to. Because I think there's a lot for us to try and understand.
Yeah, we can work on that.
Great. Dana.
Seconding exactly what you said. TIF is an extremely complicated process. It's more than just building an affordable housing project. A lot goes into it, and cities, you know, you're only allowed a couple of them at a time, and then you have to fulfill the regulations. So cities around are at the very, very beginning stages of those conversations. For me, the takeaway is that if a city gets there, then they're, you know, and then also it's that stacking of that funding. If I remember correctly, our multimedia team here in Kent made a short video around TIF and what it looks like and used it to sort of shop it with the legislators finally in the last session when they passed it. And I'm happy to try and track that down. And Claire, I'll send it in your direction, and it might be the kickoff for the TIF 101, Nancy. I think it was a little animated piece to try and break it down so that it made sense, because to your point, it's something was, while it's happening every place, and the frustrating thing is it's happening in every other state in a much less complicated manner.
Yes.
And what was adopted here. So I think those of us that worked on that at the legislature were, while we're glad we made this step, very frustrated with the extra layers of complication that Washington State decided to throw in just so we could stand out and be different from everybody else.
Yes. Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. Yeah. And, you know, there are limits to how much. I think Auburn can only have two.
We can only, yeah, we're two.
Can only have two areas. So you have to really consider what is your tax base now in that area versus what it will be. You know, you don't want to use TIF in an area that's already like, unless your downtown is just completely dead, you might not want to use it on your downtown because you already have a tax base there. And is the increase actually going to be of the most benefit to you? So there's a lot of things to consider, and I just think it might serve us all well, for those that have worked on it to have a refresher, and for those that haven't, to have a basic understanding of it. All right. Anybody else want to chat about questions 1 or 2? What else should I consider as part of the funding strategy? I think one of the things we all want to make sure that we consider is the capacity of our amazing team. Right? Anything else? Colleen.
Thank you, Mayor. I would just also echo what Mayor Ralph had to say and what the original plan was when SKIP was formulated and formed, and the blessing of having additional dollars to work with. I think at that time, as I recall as well, there was discussion about philanthropic opportunities, potentially with some of the major corporate businesses that seemed to have an interest in affordable housing, and we're engaging in partnership with City of Seattle and King County, but had also expressed an interest in some sort of vehicle for South King County as they were concerned, but didn't know sort of where or how to invest their funds. Those are conversations that I know we've had with City of Berrien and others. So I think there's that opportunity, but I also am always concerned about the bandwidth for our staff as well. So, but other than that, I think Mayor Ralph captured it brilliantly.
As she usually does. All right, let's move on then. If there are no other thoughts on questions 1 or 2, let's move on to question 3. And part of me is guessing that the answer is yes, it was captured accurately, since there hasn't been a lot of, wait a minute, you forgot this. But is there anything else that you want to add that was discussed in those small groups that hasn't been captured? That those note takers in each group were doing a fabulous job. All right, so let's move on to question 4 then. Tell me more about the philanthropic contributions and engaging the state and federal delegations. What does that mean? What does that mean to you? I think we all have an opportunity. Many of us have shared federal delegation members, which is very beneficial, and that we can work together. I think a lot of us have strong relationships with that federal delegation as well, to even provide a briefing, right, to their staffs on the great work that is possible through SKIP, and the great work that has been done quickly, funding opportunities. And it never hurts for them to know. I don't know if we have a specific ask at this point of them, but we could certainly provide information to them and their staff so that we're in their minds if funding opportunities become available that may not be right for any one of our cities individually, but it could be the perfect opportunity for additional funding for an organization such as this. Okay, how about philanthropic contributions? Anyone have any thoughts on how we engage in that? I think there are certainly some of the philanthropic organizations out there, you know, a lot of them specialize or focus in one area, they're giving, and perhaps perhaps we can easily find out, I'm sure, which organizations we should even focus any of our efforts and attentions on. Dana?
You know, what comes to mind, you know, Amazon has money for housing. A lot of it is paired up with TOD. And so there's opportunities to use Amazon money if you're developing around heavy rail, light rail, that kind of thing. So maybe even trying to brainstorm a little bit about those existing places that, again, could be stacked. If we've got a project that is coming before us that has funding from, you know, from other sources, but is still in need of additional dollars, being able to provide those folks with some resources. But I think part of the struggle, though, too, is it comes with a lot of red tape, and it gets really complicated. We've talked to developers that are very much like, we're not going to work on surplus property from Sound Transit because there's 7 layers of, you know, stuff. So, and maybe it's worth a conversation with the Amazons of the world to, like, how do we open up that funding to meet a broader need? I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's also continuing to tell our story, because we continue to see a lot of that corporate money going to the east side or going, you know, other places. So just talking about why it's important, and then making sure that we're working collaboratively.
Yes. Excellent. Thank you. Tracy?
I know that some of these big places, they have a lot of money, and it would be so nice to contact one person and just fill our coffers. But one of the reasons that we exist is because most of our cities didn't feel like that we could make a big enough impact or a complete impact with what we were allocated through the funding that we got, 1406 in particular. So I'm wondering if the same idea might apply to the business. I'm thinking right now of the business community, that what if we possibly pitched an idea to some of these chambers where you have a whole room gathered full of small businesses that maybe they can't give us $1 million. They can't even, you know, give us 20,000, but if collectively, if they were really interested in an impact and could find out, wow, Skip, this is what Skip is doing, and I can throw in my little bit. But if you work it through the chamber, when you've got 100 businesses in the room and they all collectively respond and they all feel like they had their little part, and it was super easy, a matter of some clicks on their phone or Venmo or something, that might be a way to reel in a whole bunch of small businesses instead of knocking on individual doors, right? If we do, you know, the Bellevue Chamber and the Southside Chamber and the Kent Chamber, and I don't know, it's an idea to gather a bunch of people that would like to feel like they contributed to something and don't really know how.
Mm-hmm. I know it's put together for other purposes, but the South Sound Chamber Legislative Coalition, I don't think I've got all of the letters in there right yet, but you know, that group that comes together every year to have the breakfast for our legislators prior to session. At least they're all in the same place at the same time. And
Southside Chamber, that's Annie McGrath. And that was a fabulous event last year down at the 4 Points.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Dana, you mentioned Amazon, and remember there's after the huge kickoff of the Microsoft $500 million, I don't know that they've spent a lot of it. I've not heard a lot about.
So I don't know where they're spending it. I know that, and this is one of those struggles about the partnership. They did invest through another organization in a development in Kent, but literally put brand new paint on the building and left it as a disaster. So that was my veiled we need to be good partners. That was what that was about. Like now I'm out there on camera saying it, but it's also real. Like just buying something and saying we're preserving affordable housing, I don't think it's the intent of what we all are trying to do, quite honestly. So figuring out who those partners are or building the partnerships so that there's some sort of accountability, I think is key in this realm, because you're talking about the potential for big dollars. And but beyond that, Nancy, I don't know where else they've spent the money.
Yeah, I have not heard much. I know that their focus, I mean, I think probably each of us has had numerous meetings with the Microsoft team
Yeah.
that have that responsibility, but I never had anything come to fruition. You know, one of the areas, and we've talked about preservation a lot, and we know that there aren't a lot of dollars available for preservation. You know, that could be an area of focus for us. Instead of always new, shiny, bright, and new, we know that we are running the risk in South King County, especially of that older, naturally occurring affordable housing stock being victim of House Bill 1110 for one thing. And we need to find ways of keeping our people in those homes and not having them go away. And much of the stock down in South King County, I'll speak for Auburn specifically, you know, that was 50 or 60 years ago when a lot of that housing was pushed to South King County. And I don't know that a lot has been done to it since then. So it is just ripe for the picking, and I just don't want to see that happen.
Our same exact fear in Kent. And I think that also speaks to that affordable home ownership piece that we as a group have talked about. So figuring out how do we channel some of, because the new stuff that's being built through our fund, we're seeing is predominantly multifamily rental, which there is a need, but there is also a need in both that single family realm, the home ownership, and yeah, and so I like the building I was referring to in Kent is actually Amazon money, not the Microsoft money. So I don't know that any of that Microsoft money has made its way south.
You know, if we're dreaming really big for the future, I would love to see it that we have funds not only for the new multifamily affordable housing developments, but that we do have funding available for preservation, and we do have money available to help even individuals with affordable home ownership. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing for us to be able to do, is to have those separate funds and help individuals get into their new homes for the first time, or keep individuals in their homes because of those preservation funds. I think a lot of us have maybe the housing dollars or the home funds, I think is what it may be called through HUD, but those only go so far. But just, wouldn't that be wonderful to be able to assist in that regard? Okay. Claire, are you getting what you need from us?
I am, and I'll comment briefly, and I see Colleen's hand up to, I do want to respond to the funding for preservation. So the funds that we collect for the Housing Capital Fund can be used for those preservation projects. So I did just want to make sure the board was aware. But you know, so and also home ownership opportunities, right? But it is only up to that 60% AMI. So that's kind of the challenge with home ownership, is the sweet spot in home ownership is between 60% AMI and 80%, even 90%. And you will be you will be hearing a lot more about this next month. I've invited Homestead Community Land Trusts to present on their work and how affordable home ownership plays into the work that you all are working on here at SKIP. and seeing that as a true preservation strategy. So that's going to be kind of our kickoff as we work towards talking more about affordable housing preservation. So please know that is on my radar, and I am just trying to thoughtfully come up with presenting that to you in the coming months. So know that that's there. And Colleen, I know your hand was up.
Yes, Colleen.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Mayor. That vision you presented, Mayor Backus, is exactly where Marion sits too, of seeing all those three things happening. And what I'm aware of just in the conversations that we've had both with our federal and state lobbyists and representatives, as well as some conversations that we've had with Amazon and Microsoft, is that they're not really very our representatives are more aware of South King County than those corporations. I think there's just an opportunity to have in building those partnerships, as Mayor Ralph was talking about, is just helping them really understand South King County and how our unique, what our unique needs are compared to the East Side, and where they can best invest and how easily they can invest with SKHHP. I think having all of us have that opportunity with our lobbyists and with our representatives to really talk about from a sort of one-pager perspective, an elevator speech, if you will, that every time we have the opportunity to work with those folks, that we're all saying the same thing, then SKHHP becomes much more of that household name and ability, and people seeing an easier way to bring their dollars into South King County. So if our staff are going to spend time doing anything, I think those precursor sort of things have to, that collateral information has to get created, and so that we're all equipped to talk about it in the folks that we engage with, and then to begin those initial meetings with those corporations and to be able to share that collateral with as well. But I love that vision.
Anything else on this topic? All right, look at that. We are right on schedule. Moving to legislative priorities, number 5C. And, in the past, we have adopted state legislative priorities, but given we have a lot of different diverse perspectives of the SKHHP member jurisdictions, and we didn't advocate for them this year. So we'll hear about other options for the board to unify on legislative priorities and engage our state-led delegation on the affordable housing needs of South King County. That kind of goes along with what we were just talking about. So Claire, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. And Dorsal, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. All right, thank you. So it is that time of the year where we begin to think about legislative priorities. And so as a refresher for the board, last year you adopted a robust advocacy agenda after several meetings and formed a small work group to develop a draft for the board's consideration, which the board adopted. And in February of this year, the board directed SKHHP staff to remain neutral on legislation, given the diverse positions of SKHHP's member jurisdictions, like Mayor Backus mentioned, and the time that it would take to receive confirmation from all of the member jurisdictions, whether they supported a given position. So with session beginning in January, I did want to start this conversation on how we might approach legislative priorities a little bit differently this year. And Dorsal, if you could go to the next slide. So I wanted to just highlight a few of the challenges for you to start thinking about as I prepare to talk about what my proposal to you might be. So challenges in engaging the legislature that we've talked through a little bit in previous meetings include that session moves really fast and bills change quickly. It doesn't allow much time for SKHHP to respond with a confirmed unified voice from our member jurisdictions, and that we have board members that serve as representatives of their jurisdictions and councils, but don't necessarily have the power to take a position without that prior consultation from their councils. And SKHHP has limited staff capacity for this work as well. and finding consensus among the group can be challenging. And then a lack of detailed awareness about SKIP among our delegation is also a barrier. You heard Colleen kind of talking about this and that importance of just getting the word out that we're here and that folks really have a good understanding about what we do and what our mission is. So next slide, please. So given those considerations, I have a few recommendations for the board's consideration. So perhaps we don't pursue a beefy legislative policy agenda this year, and we focus on one item that we can all agree on. And we just had a fairly lengthy conversation about this, but that one item being the need for funding all aspects of affordable housing in South King County. And you've already mentioned some of these, so I'm glad we're all we're all on the same page. But home ownership for moderate income households and below, the preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing, or the NOAA, land acquisition to secure that permanent affordability, funding for permanent supportive housing, that infrastructure around the projects. I know that's a big one for many communities, and how do we fund that? And then workforce housing. These are just some examples. It's not an exhaustive list. And then next slide, please. So to help get the word out about SKIP and the need for funding South King County affordable housing needs, and Colleen alluded to this, but my proposal would be that board members serve as ambassadors for SKIP and this need for additional funds for housing in South County. And Colleen mentioned it already, since most of you are already in those meetings with the delegations for your own jurisdictions, legislative agenda, you could add the need for funding in South King County to those conversations. And I would provide a one-pager about SKIP and about the specific needs of South King County, along with talking points on why this is crucial, why it's important, so that we can all kind of be talking from the same script. And another item to consider is adding this need for affordable housing funding to your own jurisdiction's legislative priorities. This would help amplify the message across the SKIP coalition and show the state and federal delegations that we're united and we all agree that this is a high priority for South King County. And another recommendation I'd like to bring forward is a follow-up to the long-term funding strategy for the Housing Capital Fund conversation. If there are municipal projects that your jurisdiction is seeking funding for that's related to housing vulnerable populations, I would love to have a list of those projects across our member jurisdictions. Excuse me, just really for awareness, but also for potential advocacy, and to be able to reference those projects and sort of point to those when I am engaging with the delegation on SKIP related matters. That is going to be really crucial and important, because oftentimes, I think I've mentioned this, those funders really like to fund projects. And you know, talking about funding the Housing Capital Fund for the legislature, even for our federal delegation, it's not as a compelling argument as this very specific tangible project needs funding. And so I think that is potentially a way that SKIP can help reinforce you know, the South King County needs, specifically if those projects exist. So with that, I would love your thoughts and feedback on the recommendations, as I know this is a little different than how we have typically approached the legislative session. So would love to hear your thoughts.
I will unmute. Any thoughts from anyone on that? Thank you, Claire, for providing that. Tracy.
Great recommendations. I really resonated, all that resonated with me. In fact, I even made I went into my legislative priority file and even made some notes as moving forward for us here pretty soon. So I agree with your recommendation. Thank you, Claire.
Anyone else? Are you supportive? We're not, there's no action that needed to be taken today. I see some thumbs up flying across the screen. I love that. It does make it a little simpler for us too, if I'm going to be honest, because we've had some lengthy conversations about legislative priorities and the intricacies of those. So everybody good with this approach? Anyone have a concern over this approach? And it's not necessarily a one and done. We obviously can revisit this at any time. So if you're good with that as our at least short-term plan going forward, looks like I'm getting some head nods and some thumbs up. So Claire, it looks like we're good to go in that direction. And I am going to move us on to the next item, which is updates and announcements. Does anyone have anything that they would like to share? And it doesn't have to just be on housing. It can be on anything. If you're having some great events in your city, something fun that you're going to be doing. I think on a beautiful Friday afternoon, we all want to hear somebody's going to be doing something really fun. Anybody have anything? Well, I'm going to go out to the races this weekend out at Pacific Raceways. So my husband is out there today enjoying the beautiful weather. And I think because it was a little cooler this morning, I bet there are some great times on those.
Great track times this morning.
Right. Yeah, because it was just perfect track conditions, I bet, this morning.
Praying for under 80 for the rest of the weekend.
Oh, heavens. Yes. Yes. Tracy.
Well, our Waterland Festival is this weekend and our parade is on Saturday. And I think I heard, Nancy, aren't the corgi races down at Emerald Downs this weekend too?
They are indeed on Sunday. Those famous corgi races are down at Emerald Downs. Yes. Thank you for that, Tracy. Ryan.
Yeah, we have Renton River Days this weekend, so getting ready for that. Have a really cool new thing this year. Actually, tonight at 9:30, we're going to do a drone show downtown since we didn't do fireworks this year with Coolon under construction. So excited to see how that looks. I know the one I saw in Redmond looked pretty cool. So and then we have our parade tomorrow, and rubber ducks on Sunday.
The famous rubber ducks. And Tracy, didn't Des Moines do a drone show?
Yes, we did. And it was a great success. And since I've been elected, I have not gotten more feedback on anything, positive or negative. But this was all positive. People pulling me aside in public, at events, and writing. So even though there were some naysayers, I still have not gotten more feedback on anything, and it was positive. So great. I hope it's that way for you guys, Ryan, because it's cool. Yeah.
Yes, I can't wait to hear, Ryan, about Renton's. I look forward to that. And if we have nothing else, go enjoy your Friday afternoon. And thank you so much for your continued support of this work. We know that there's much work to be done, and I couldn't think of a better group to be working on it with. So thank you so much. Claire Dorsal, thank you, and the staff working group. We know that you are the ones that do all of the work behind the scenes so that we can be successful, and we really do appreciate everything that you do. Have a great weekend, and until we see each other again, I hope everything comes up happiness and the problems are small and the joys are many. Take care. Bye-bye.